Hey everyone, it's Mrs. Lawson, and I am here to talk to you today about the quadratic formula. So this is the third and final way of how to solve a quadratic. So far you learned about factoring and then using the zero product property once you have it in factored form and setting those factors equal to 0 to solve for x. You also learned about the square root method, which is where we basically just isolate x, and in every step we'll have to take the square root of some number to solve for x, and that's why it gets the name the square root method. And the final way is with something known as the quadratic formula. So Miss Roseline asked you to do something in the week prior, so you should have the quadratic formula memorized. Because you're asked to write it down 25 times and submit it. And trust me, I'm sure you know it at this point. But there is actually a song, and I don't know if Miss Roseline sang this song for you, and that must be why she asked me to do this, because I'm just an amazing singer. So anyway, well, I gotta switch back so you can see what I'm doing. This is the song of how to remember the quadratic formula. So it is in the form of Pop Goes the Weasel, if you are familiar with that. But here is our problem in standard form, or our standard form equation. And the song goes, so don't laugh, and you'll only hear this once from me, x equals opposite b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So be lucky that she didn't ask you to sing that 25 times and submit that. But later in math, they're going to ask you to sing the song, and so now you've heard the song. So when do you use the quadratic formula? You use the quadratic formula when it is in standard form, you know, something like this, just totally making up a problem. And when you try to factor it, you know, looking for factors of -8, that get me to 3x, and the factors of 8, here they are over to the side. None of these factors will get me to 3x. So in the past, we just would have said not factorable and move on. But now there is this backup method. So what we usually tell students is, you know, you try to factor, you can't, it's not factorable. So you're really sad, and you cheer yourself up by singing a song, the song I just sang for you. So how do you use the quadratic formula to solve it? Well, first you need to know the quadratic formula, which again is right up here. And you need to know the different parts. You need to be able to identify what's A, what's B, and what's C. And so A, for instance, in this problem is the number that's attached to x squared, so it's 4. It's not 4x squared. B is the number that's attached to the x, or the coefficient with x, and that's 3. And C is the standalone constant number. And notice up here, when I wrote standard form, that everything is with plus signs. So when you see -2, you really need to look at C as a -2, and then you can put the numbers in. So before we do that, we're just going to recover how do you simplify a square root, because in the quadratic formula there is a square root part, and sometimes you're going to have to simplify there. So remember, you just need to know your perfect square roots, and I've attached them here. So looking at 20, you know, what are the factors of 20 that are perfect? So we're looking right here, and 4 and 5. So sorry, close your eyes. I can break this down into the square root of 4, the square root of 5, and that becomes 2 root 5. And when I do the square root of 90, so again, here's my list of factors of 90. And so when I look at 90, what I want to see is what numbers are perfect. So going left to right, I see 9 and 10, and that's it. So I would break 90 down into the square root of 9 and 10, and then that becomes 3 root 10. And then for 15, when I look at the square root of 15, so here's 15, and when I look at those, I notice that none of them are perfect. So I would just leave 15 as the square root of 15. Sometimes you cannot simplify the radical. All right, so what do you have to do? How to use the quadratic formula. So the first thing you need to do up here is you're going to have to make sure that it is in standard form, that it's the ax squared then the bx, then c, and it equals 0. So the first thing I notice is just looking at problem 4 and 5 is 5 is in standard form, but 4 is not. So I need to move 1 to the left side, and I'm going to do that by subtracting 1. And once I do that, my problem is 3x squared. I am going to put a 1 in front of this x, and I subtracted 1 to the other side. So now this is in standard form. And I'm going to go through, identify what a, what b, what c is. So a is 3. Again, it's the coefficient, the number attached to x squared. B is -1. That's the coefficient or the number attached to the x. And c is the constant, the standalone number is -1. And then I start. So it goes x equals opposite b. So I'm going to be putting in the opposite of b. So instead of -1, I'll put 1. Plus or minus square root. And under the square root, I'll be taking -1 and squaring it. And when I do this, I'm always going to take this b squared and always put it in parentheses, just in case you're sitting at home and you decide you want to use your calculator. So, and then it goes minus 4 times a times c, and then it's all over 2 times a. So where I like to start after that is in the check mark. This check mark is known as the discriminant. Okay, so what I'm going to do is follow my order of operations and get that down to a single number. So just moving down, I still have 1 plus or minus, but now instead of a bunch of numbers under the square root, I'm just going to get it down to one number. So following the order of operations, the first thing I should do is exponents, and I will be taking this -1 here and squaring it. And when I take -1 and I square it, when I take any number and square it, a number times itself, I will always get a positive number, okay? And if you don't type that into your calculator correctly, it will give you the wrong answer. So real quick, I want to show you what I mean. If I type in -1 squared, what the calculator is seeing with this negative in front is take the opposite of 1 squared. So the opposite of 1 squared, well, 1 squared is 1, and then the opposite of 1 is -1. So you need to let your calculator know that you want to square a negative number and always put it in parentheses, because when you type it in like this, you're telling your calculator to take -1 times -1. So just remember, whenever you square any number, a number times itself, a negative times a negative, or a positive times a positive, you will always get a positive number. All right, so back to the quadratic formula. Again, this part that's in the check mark, that is known as the discriminant. So when I take -1 and square it, I get 1. After that, I want to follow, after exponents is my multiplying, so I'm going to multiply these numbers right here. So there's the minus sign. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times -1 is -12. And if you remember, when you subtract a negative, you are actually just adding a positive. You can add the opposite. There's the denominator continuing. So just going along, I still have 1 plus or minus. In that check mark now, I'll be taking 1 and adding 12. And then in the denominator, I'm going to take the 2 times 3 and get 6. All right, so here is the tough part. How do you know when your answer is finished? Because when you type in your answer on the practice and on the quiz, we are only going to be accepting the most simplified answer. So you need to be doing a few things. First, you need to go to your radical and determine, is that simplified? Is 13 perfect, or are there any factors of 13 that are perfect? So if you just look up at here at 13, my only factors of 13 are 1 and 13, and neither of those are perfect. So as far as submitting your answer on the practice and in Go School It and the quiz, this is how you would type in your answer. And I'll make sure that you guys are aware of how you type in your answer when we get through these. So this problem is good. What's highlighted is our answer. All right, number 5. So this one is in standard form. So what I'm going to do is identify A. So A is the coefficient with x squared. That's 1. B is 6 and C is 3. And again, I'm going to take my problem and do x equals, and it goes opposite B plus or minus square root. And then I'm going to take B Again, I'm putting it in parentheses, b squared minus 4 times a times c, and I'll take all of that and divide it by 2 times a, which is 1. So where you should always direct your focus first is inside the radical. Again, this is known as the discriminant. So going down to my next line, -6 plus or minus, I'm going to go ahead and turn this denominator of 2 times 1 into 2, and I'm going to get this check mark down and work it into one number. So again, you always start with the exponent. 6 squared means 6 times 6, that's 36. After exponents, I should multiply over here, so 4 times 1 times 3, that's 12. Moving along, so it's still -6 plus or minus. I can go a step further and take 36 and subtract 12 and get 24 over 2. So again, this is where when you submit your answers, if you type this in, it will not come back as correct. Oops, I want the highlighter. What ends up happening here is in that square root of 24. 24 is not perfect, but it has factors that are. So with this 24, what I can do is break it down into the factors of 4 and 6, and then the square root of 4 can become 2 root 6. So moving along with my final answer, it's still going to be -6, it's still going to be plus or minus, but instead of the square root of 24, it's going to be 2 with the square root of 6 over 2. And even here, this is not the most final answer. You have one more step to do. So if you can do this first step of simplifying the radical of 24, then you'll still have to check this final step. What I like to do is make what I call the simplifying triangle. So I'm going to connect -6, the 2, and the 2. This square root of 6 is not part of it. And what I'm just going to ask myself is I'm going to see, is there a number that I can divide into both -6, 2, and 2? So I'm simplifying it. And what I realize is I can divide those three numbers by 2. So -6 divided by 2 is -3. I can take the 2 and divide it by 2. The square root of 6 will stay as the square root of 6, and I can take the 2 in the denominator and divide it by 2 and get 1. So this is an acceptable answer to type into Schoology. You probably would not see us putting the 1s there though, so just -3 plus or minus the square root of 6 is the best answer, but you could always type in that first part, the one that I'm about to circle now. So 4 is an example, again, of where, once you put everything in, just simplify that discriminant, you're done. But problem 5, there is a little bit more work. So let's take a look at the next two, and this should go a little faster. So again, looking at 6 and 7, what I noticed is that these are not in standard form. All right, I had to pause there for a moment. My dogs were barking, so now they're inside. All right, so it's not in standard form, so I'm going to have to move the 5 over. I'll do that by subtracting. So again, just to make sure it's in standard form, it goes ax squared plus bx, and then the c, and I'm subtracting the 5 over. So real quick, let's identify what a is. That's the 2, b is 4, and c is -5. It's not 5, so some people are going to get a little lazy, not get into standard form, and think that c is 5 and not -5. And now I'm ready to start. So it goes x equals opposite b, so -4, plus or minus square root, and then inside the square root, I will be taking 4 and squaring it, and then I'll subtract 4 times a times c. So let's make that square root go a little bit further. And then all of that is over 2 times a, so 2 times 2. So again, you always start in the discriminant. And when you start with the discriminant, you start with your exponents, order of operations. So inside that square root, 4 squared is 16. There's that subtraction sign. After exponents, you do your multiplying and dividing, so 4 times 2 times -5. And when I multiply all of that, let's see, what do we get? We get -40. And then again, all over 2 times a. I am going to go ahead and take this 2 times 2 and change that into 4. I'm still not done simplifying my discriminant. Some of you will go faster at this, but it goes -4. And when you have 16 and you subtract -40, again, that's going to be like you adding a +40. So inside that square root, is 56, and then all of that is over 4. So what I want to see, is this answer good or is it not? Do I have to simplify further? So the first thing you check is 54, although it's not perfect, does it have factors that are perfect? So just jumping up here to my factor page, the square roots or 56, so we're looking right here, and I see 4 and 14 in that mix, right? So I'm gonna have to use 4 and 14 to simplify it because 4 is perfect. So let's go down here, and I like to do this just right above it. So 56 is gonna be broken down into root 4 and root 14. And then the square root of 4 becomes 2 and root 14. So going to the next step, it goes -4 plus or minus, and now it's 2 square root of 14 over 4. And then you have one more thing. Make your simplifying triangle. Leave the square root out of it. It's the -4, the 2, and this 4 down here. Is there a number that I can divide into all of those? And again, that's going to be a 2, so I'm going to divide everything by 2. So when I divide -4 by 2, I get -2 plus or minus. When I divide this 2 here by 2, I get 1. I will not put the 1 because I don't need it. And when I divide this denominator by 2, I get 2. And this is what you should be typing into your answer. And again, I'm going to show you in just a moment how you do that. All right, last one. So number 7, again, this is not in standard form, so I'm going to add the 13 over. So it becomes x squared minus 4x plus 13 equals 0. Let's identify A. There's an understood 1 here, so that's 1. B is -4, and C is a positive 13. And now it's going to go x equals opposite b, so 4 plus or minus square root. Again, I will be taking that -4 and squaring it. And some of you are going to, again, you're going to do steps a little bit faster in your head instead of all these little steps. And then it's going to go -4 times a times c. And then all over 2 times a, so 2 times 1. All right, now next up, we are about to go to this, our discriminant. So moving on down, it's going to go x equals 4 plus or minus. I'm going to go ahead and get that denominator right here down to one number, 2 times 1. So I'm going to change it into 2. And now working on that discriminant. So first I will do my -4 squared right here, 16. And then I'm going to subtract, and I'll do my multiplication. So 4 times 1 times 3, which is 52. Moving on down, it's going to go 4 plus or minus over 2. And when you take 16 and you subtract 52, I actually end up getting a -36. So this isn't going to happen very often in Algebra 1, but this will happen in Algebra 2. There are times when you're done that you are going to get the square root of a negative number. And for now, what we are going to say, because we learned back in the first semester that you can't take the square root of a negative number, that our answer is non-real. Okay? So just keep that in mind. This one is non-real. If it were to happen just to be a positive 36 real quick. So just a what if we had gotten 36 in here? Then I could take the square root of 36 because that's actually perfect and get 6. Now notice I am changing the problem just so you could see a little bit further. And you can actually get some really nice numbers out of this. You can go to your numerator and you can do hold on. You could do 4 plus 6, which is 10. Hold on, this is not switching. And divide it by that 2 in the denominator and get 5. And then you could do this again, but do take 4 minus 6 and get -2. Divide that by 2 and get -1. But again, that would only be if the 36 had been positive. So let's talk real quick about how you're about to type in your answers, okay? So when you get to your practice or your quiz and you're going to be asked to type in your answer, you'll be typing in that keyboard, and you will need to go to the fraction button, which is right here next to the sign button. And this will not be the correct answer, but now you're ready to type it in. So your simplified answer turns out it's -3. you will need to go here next to the dollar sign. This is your plus or minus button. And then you'll need to go to the top right next to your square root and get your square root button in. Let's say it's square root of 17 over 6. This is how we're going to expect you to write this. Again, the numerator, you're just going to have your integer here, plus or minus, your square root will go second, and then over your denominator. That's it. Good luck. We'll see you in week 5.